In this second video of the course, we're going to briefly review the prevalence of data loss and the costs associated. So data loss is like a wound's effect on the body, disrupting the essential flow of information, and even for those using cloud-based platforms like Microsoft 365, organizations have found this to be an increasingly prevalent issue. Multiple factors, I'm not going to list all of them, do affect how and why data loss occurs. So syncing failures is one of those facets that would particularly be relevant to the cloud. Back in the year 2008, the Ponemon Institute released a report that approximately 600,000 laptops were lost in US airports each year. So that's just the US. And we have no reason to believe that that number has decreased since then. Now, people mitigate these issues with loss of data on devices by using cloud services. But there's that offline time on a device before it gets to sync back up to the cloud, where files are temporarily stored directly on the device. Now, even if the device was not lost, syncing is a key because improper synchronization settings or sometimes just sync failures can lead to data discrepancies or loss across devices, leading to miscommunications, missed appointments, historical record issues for meeting auditory compliance, legal, business analytics requirements that the operations of the organization really depend on. Infrastructure failures, hardware failures, cloud service disruptions. These are also factors, especially particularly affecting cloud environments, but also on-prem, particularly when we're talking about hardware failures. So we have the case of Norfolk Southern, a major rail transportation company based out of Atlanta, Georgia, in the US. They had a catastrophic hardware system failure in August of 2023, affecting, it was like a supply chain of events because one area missing the data affected another and another and another, but they had a lack of availability of their data. Their positive train control system was even disrupted, and that led to widespread operational shutdowns and substantial business impacts. Now, cloud providers also can have these issues. We've got issues in 2021 with Google Cloud outages and Microsoft Azure outages, and in 2023, another Microsoft Azure outage. So the Google one happened because of an authentication issue. So they had lack of availability of their data associated with the Google Cloud Storage, the Google Compute Engine, and the Kubernetes engine. And then you have with Azure in 2021, outage was associated by a cooling system failure in one of their data centers, leading to overheating and service disruptions. And it affected multiple regions in this case. So understanding the regions of data centers is important too when you're thinking about backup and recovery. So the 2023 Microsoft Azure outage was actually associated with a denial of service attack. So they had several methods that were employed by supposedly a group called Anonymous Sudan. They claimed responsibility for the disruptions. They did HTTP flood attacks, cache bypass, slow LoRa's techniques, overwhelmed the service with a high volume of requests, and caused service hangups due to the servers being unable to process all the incoming data. Now, Microsoft did respond to that by applying load balancing and other mitigation strategies to manage the situation. But on June 9th of 2023, users had significant disruptions when they're trying to access the Azure portal and other Microsoft services like Outlook for email and OneDrive. So the vulnerability is across the board in association with data loss, and it is very common. You have supply chain impact, as I briefly mentioned a little bit before, but it's important to note that each one of these can have significant impact on various supply chains, as many organizations are dependent on others to function. So when one loses data, as commonly occurs, the effect trickles down or perhaps creates a flood of issues as these consequences snowball. And a pertinent real-world example of data loss related to supply chain issues could involve Accenture. It was a major technology consulting firm, and in 2020, they faced a ransomware attack from the Lockbit ransomware group. So their data was compromised. The attackers claimed to have stolen 6 terabytes of data and threatened to publish it. And when critical systems were potentially compromised, there could have been disruptions in that normal flow of operations. And for companies reliant on just-in-time delivery systems or those with tightly coupled supply chain dependencies, we know that even those small delays or uncertainties can lead to significant operational disruptions. So, studies have shown the pervasive and often devastating costs associated with hardware failures. The Ponemon Institute reported the average cost of downtime due to hardware failure is around $9,000 per minute. Now, there's cost associated with data loss across the board. When we talk about hardware failure, we already saw in the previous example that that does affect the cloud environment, even though we're not physically managing that. And it can disrupt the connection between users and the cloud platform. So, cloud providers do implement measures like data replication and redundancy to mitigate the impact of those hardware failures. They're still not infallible. And sometimes simultaneous failures or cascading hardware issues can overwhelm those redundancy systems and lead to the data loss or the service disruptions. So the consequences, they extend beyond just the operational disruptions, including recovery cost, brand damage, compliance issues. Your regulations like GDPR emphasize the importance of data recoverability, and that makes it a legal and operational imperative. And data loss can cripple business continuity. With critical data such as customer information, vital records, and operational data lost, the ability to perform daily tasks can come to a halt. Regulations such as Article 32 of the GDPR mandate demonstrate recoverability of data. So your organization must not only protect personal data, but also ensure it can recover that data after a loss incident. And failure to comply can result in those heavy fines and legal consequences, further emphasizing the need for robust data protection and disaster recovery plans. So we know the cost of data loss can be extensive, that it regularly occurs, and it impacts every aspect of an organization's operations and can trickle down to other organizations, affecting people's reputation, legal standing, and so on. Understanding these risks and underscores the critical need for a solid foundation in your data protection strategy. Mitigating these risks, it's essential not to understand just the potential impacts, but also to be thoroughly acquainted with the tools and technologies at our disposal for preventing such incidents. So, this leads us directly into the architecture of systems we rely on, such as Microsoft 365 Exchange, where proper setup and management are fundamental to safeguarding our data. In the next video, we'll review data protection and data detection capabilities directly within the Microsoft 365 ecosystem.